My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 32 years old, I live in Chicago, and I've worked hard to build a steady career in digital marketing. To most people who know me casually, I look like someone who has her life neatly put together. But what happened to me on the morning I thought I was leaving for a long-awaited family vacation shattered that illusion. Imagine showing up at your parents' house, suitcase packed, sunscreen already on your skin, your heart bursting with anticipation, only to be told that you were never invited in the first place. That is exactly what happened to me. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. Before I go on, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt overlooked or forgotten by your own family, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you can follow along with stories that remind us we're never truly alone in our struggles. That morning, I pulled into my parents' driveway in Naperville with my favorite travel playlist still humming through my car speakers. The garage door was wide open, revealing stacked luggage already loaded into the back of my dad's SUV. The sight filled me with joy. After years of being left out of the spotlight in my family, I thought this trip was finally going to be my chance to feel included. I climbed out, adjusted my wide-brimmed sun hat, and grabbed my suitcase. My heart was pounding, but in the best possible way. I had spent weeks preparing, researching activities, buying gifts for each family member, and even practicing simple Hawaiian greetings. For once, I thought, my parents had meant it when they said, "We want everyone there." But the moment my mom opened the front door, all that excitement crashed to the ground. She looked startled to see me, like I was an unexpected delivery instead of her daughter. Her travel outfit, a crisp linen blouse and tailored pants, only highlighted the fact that she was ready to board a plane I apparently wasn't welcome on. "Rachel," she said in a voice that was both tight and awkward, "what are you doing here?" I laughed lightly, convinced she was joking. "I'm here for the ride to the airport, Mom, just like we planned." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door halfway shut behind her. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "you were never actually on the guest list. We figured you'd be fine staying home." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Her words didn't make sense. I had been part of every discussion, every group text, every detail of planning. I had bought gifts for each of them. I had taken 2 weeks off work. I was ready for this trip in every possible way. Yet here I was, standing on the porch, excluded by the very people who should have been pulling me inside. And behind that door, I could hear the voices of my siblings, laughing, dragging their bags across the tile floor, preparing for the trip I had dreamed of for months. Tell me, if this had been you standing in my place, what would you have done? That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate choice. And that choice would change everything about how I saw my family. And so, before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand why this betrayal cut so deeply, you need to know what it meant to grow up as the forgotten middle child in the Morgan family. I grew up in the middle, literally and figuratively. Ethan was the oldest, 3 years ahead of me, and he was the golden boy from the moment he took his first steps. My parents loved to brag about him, whether it was his performance on the baseball field or his near-perfect grades. He seemed destined for success, and he lived up to every expectation they piled on his shoulders. Then there was Chloe, the baby of the family, 7 years younger than me. She had big brown eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's resolve, especially my parents'. She was their darling, their little muse, the one they indulged without hesitation. And then there was me. Not the firstborn to be celebrated, not the baby to be adored, just the middle child who, according to my parents, was so independent that she didn't need as much. That word independent was used like a compliment. My mom would repeat it at every family gathering, at church, even in front of the neighbors. "Rachel is so independent," she'd say with pride. But beneath those words was something much colder. "She doesn't need us. She doesn't need the same attention. She'll be fine." Independence wasn't something I chose. It was something I was forced into because when the spotlight was constantly on Ethan or Chloe, there was nothing left for me. I remember one summer when I was 12. Ethan was chosen for an elite baseball camp in Florida, and my parents jumped at the opportunity to send him. They turned it into a family trip, only not for all of us. Chloe, at 5 years old, tagged along with Mom to the beach while Ethan trained. I, on the other hand, was sent to stay with my Aunt Caroline in Milwaukee. They didn't even try to sugarcoat it. "Rachel, it will be fun," Mom told me, as she dropped me off, like it was a treat to be shuffled off while my family bonded without me. I spent those 2 weeks listening to the sound of planes overhead, imagining my parents and siblings on a sunny Florida beach, while I watered my aunt's garden and played endless rounds of cards with her. I learned then that my place was not at the center of my family's joy, but somewhere on the outside, looking in. By 16, it wasn't much different. We took a road trip to the Grand Canyon. The SUV was packed tight, and there was an unspoken hierarchy of comfort. My parents took the front seats, of course. Ethan got a whole side of the middle row. Chloe curled up on the other with a pillow and blanket. And me? I was wedged in the back with the luggage, my knees pressed up against a duffel bag, the sun beating down on me through the rear window. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that it was only a seat, but I couldn't ignore the symbolism. Even in the car, I was relegated to the margins. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped expecting to be treated equally. I started making my own plans, taking solo trips with money I saved from part-time jobs, creating my own traditions when the family ones excluded me. My mother loved to boast to her friends, "Rachel is so self-sufficient. She doesn't need us like the other two." She never understood that my self-sufficiency was not a gift but a shield. After college, I moved to Chicago, just 40 minutes away, and I built a life that was mine. I worked hard, got promoted steadily, and earned enough to live comfortably. But even though I was physically close, emotionally I kept my distance. I only went home for holidays and the occasional Sunday dinner, and at those gatherings, it was always the same. Conversations revolved around Ethan's career triumphs or Chloe's latest artistic pursuit. If I mentioned my own work, it was acknowledged politely, then brushed aside. The thing about being overlooked is that after a while, you stop fighting it. You learn to nod, smile, and let the conversation move on. You learn to swallow the sting and pretend it doesn't matter. But deep down, it always does. It builds inside you like sediment, layering hurt on top of hurt, until one day, the weight of it threatens to break you. That was why, when Dad announced at dinner a few months ago that he was planning a family vacation to Hawaii, I felt something shift inside me. 2 weeks in Maui, he said proudly. We've saved for years. It will be the perfect family getaway. For the first time in years, I felt included. When he looked at me and said, "We want everyone there," I wanted so badly to believe that this time, I wasn't just a background character in my own family's story. For weeks, I let myself be hopeful. I researched restaurants in Lahaina, snorkeling tours near Molokini Crater, and hikes through Haleakala National Park. I sent links to my parents, created a shared document with options, and even organized a rough itinerary. Mom thanked me for being so thoughtful. Dad called me organized. For once, I wasn't invisible. But what I didn't realize then was that this hope would only make the eventual betrayal cut deeper. I had convinced myself that years of exclusion were behind us, that this trip would finally be my chance to belong. And so, when I pulled into the driveway with my suitcase ready and my heart full of anticipation, I believed I was stepping into a new chapter of family unity. I couldn't have known that my family's old patterns would not only repeat themselves, but escalate to a level of cruelty I never imagined. And the sting of being excluded yet again, this time in such a deliberate and humiliating way, would push me to make a decision that would change everything. Because that driveway moment, when my mother looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't invited, was not the beginning of the story. It was the breaking point. And it all made sense when I looked back at the years of being the forgotten middle child, quietly absorbing every slight. What I chose to do after that betrayal would shock even me. And to understand why I reacted the way I did, you need to see exactly how that moment played out in real time, standing on that porch, suitcase in hand, while the people I called family loaded the car without me. I can still picture the night it all began to feel different. It was one of those ordinary Sunday dinners at my parents' house in Naperville, the kind where the table was always set a little too formally for a casual family meal. My dad was at the head of the table, sipping his favorite Cabernet, while Mom floated back and forth from the kitchen with the kind of energy that said she wanted everything to look perfect. Ethan was talking about some high-profile client at his firm. Chloe was sketching absent-mindedly on the corner of her napkin, and I was sitting there, quietly, like I always did. Then my father cleared his throat, a sound that demanded attention. "I've been planning something," he announced. His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. 2 weeks in Maui. We've been saving for years, and now it's finally happening." Chloe gasped and clapped her hands together like a child. Ethan grinned, raising his glass to toast. Mom beamed as though Dad had just handed her a gift wrapped in gold. And then my father turned to me. His gaze held steady, and his voice softened. "We want everyone there." For a split second, I thought I had misheard. Everyone? Did he mean me too? I forced myself not to show the surge of emotion threatening to break through my calm expression. I nodded slowly, but inside, I was dizzy with relief. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't invisible. I was part of the circle. The days that followed became a whirlwind of planning, and for once, I was right in the middle of it. I poured myself into the details, like if I worked hard enough, I could cement my place in this family trip and in my family itself. I stayed up late researching restaurants in Lahaina, reading reviews of luau's that promised authentic hula and roasted pig. I combed through travel blogs about snorkeling at Molokini Crater and sunrise hikes at Haleakala National Park. Every discovery made me more excited, and I shared it all in a Google document I created for the family. To my surprise, my parents actually thanked me. "You're so organized," Dad said over the phone one night. "This might be the best vacation we've ever had." Mom texted me back little hearts when I sent her pictures of sunset sailboat tours. I almost cried when she wrote, "Thanks for putting so much thought into this, sweetheart." I let myself believe. That's the part that still hurts the most. I let myself believe that after years of being overlooked, I had finally earned a seat at the table. I started shopping on weekends, a ritual that filled me with anticipation. I picked out 2 new swimsuits, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and a flowing sundress I imagined wearing to dinner by the ocean. I wandered through gift shops in Chicago, picking out thoughtful tokens for each of them. A Hawaiian print shirt for Dad, a pearl bracelet for Mom, a waterproof phone case for Ethan, and a delicate journal for Chloe to sketch in. Each item was chosen with care, wrapped in tissue, and packed neatly into my suitcase days before we were even scheduled to leave. At night, I practiced basic Hawaiian phrases on a language app, smiling at myself in the mirror as I repeated them. Aloha, mahalo, ohana, family. That word carried so much weight for me. I imagined us walking down the beach together, laughing, a whole unit for the first time in years. Even at work, I couldn't contain my excitement. When I submitted my vacation request, my boss asked what the occasion was. "A family trip," I said with a grin. "It's been years since we all traveled together. This one's special." She approved it without hesitation, even telling me to soak up every second of it. I told Samantha, my best friend, about it over drinks one Friday night. She raised her eyebrows skeptically, reminding me of all the times my family had sidelined me in the past. But I shook my head. "It feels different this time. I think they really want me there." I wanted it to be true so badly that I convinced myself it was. The night before departure, I went through my suitcase one last time. I laid out each outfit carefully, packed my gifts into a separate pouch, and even slipped a small card into each package with a handwritten note. I wanted them to know I had thought of them, that I had invested in this trip not just with money but with heart. I woke up early the next morning, showered, and dressed in my favorite travel outfit, a soft sundress that made me feel light and hopeful. I applied sunscreen before even leaving the apartment, laughing at myself for being so eager. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car, I whispered, "This is it, Rachel. This is the trip that changes everything." The drive to Naperville felt endless, even though I knew the route by heart. My hands gripped the wheel tightly as I imagined the 2 weeks ahead. Snorkeling in crystal waters, hiking trails through lush landscapes, family dinners on the lanai, laughter echoing against the backdrop of the Pacific. For once, I let myself picture belonging. When I turned into the driveway and saw the garage door open with luggage being loaded into the SUV, my chest swelled with anticipation. This was real. This was happening. I parked my car, stepped out into the warm sun, and wheeled my suitcase toward the front door. I rang the bell, my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself that when the door opened, I'd see my parents' faces light up. They'd wave me inside, hand me a glass of iced tea, and say how glad they were that I'd made it early. But what happened instead would shatter that fragile illusion into pieces. And in that single moment, every ounce of hope I had built over weeks of planning would come crashing down. Because, as soon as the door opened, I realized the story I thought I was stepping into was not the one my family had written for me, and nothing could have prepared me for the words that were about to leave my mother's lips. The door creaked open, and there she was, my mother, standing in her travel clothes as though she were already halfway to Maui. A crisp linen blouse, wide-leg pants, sandals made for airport security. She looked at me, the way someone looks at a neighbor's package mistakenly delivered to their doorstep, puzzled, inconvenienced, not delighted. "Rachel," she said, her tone clipped. "What are you doing here?" I blinked, stunned by the question. My suitcase handle was warm in my palm, sunscreen already layered on my skin. I forced a laugh, the kind of nervous laugh that begs for someone to say they're joking. "I'm here for the ride to O'Hare, Mom. The flight's at 6, remember? We agreed to meet here by noon." Her eyes darted over my shoulder, toward the driveway, where my father was hoisting Ethan's golf bag into the SUV. She stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her until it was only cracked open, as though she was shielding me from something, or shielding someone else from me. "Sweetheart," she said in a voice that was too soft to be kind, "you were never actually on the guest list. We figured you'd be fine staying home." The words struck like a slap. My chest tightened, my face flushed hot, and for a split second I thought I might actually faint. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to admit this was some sort of cruel prank, but she didn't. "What are you talking about?" My voice cracked, and I hated the way it sounded, weak, desperate. "I planned with you for weeks. I took time off work. I bought gifts. You told me Dad told me you wanted everyone there." For the first time, her eyes flickered with something like discomfort, but her lips remained in that thin, unyielding line. "The villa only has 3 bedrooms, she explained, as though this were a reasonable answer. "Your father and I need one. Ethan has the second. And Chloe, well, she's bringing Ryan. They'll share the third." It was the first time I'd even heard the name Ryan. "Her boyfriend?" I repeated dumbly. I didn't even know she was bringing someone. "They've been dating a couple of months," my mother replied, her voice quick, defensive. "It will be nice for them to have this time together." The door opened wider, and my father appeared, sweat on his brow from lugging bags. He was wearing the straw fedora he only ever brought out for vacations. He froze when he saw me, his expression tightening, his jaw clenching. "Dad," I said, clinging to the hope that he would set this straight. "Tell her this is a mistake." But he didn't. He just stood there, one hand settling on my mother's shoulder like an anchor, his silence louder than any words. I looked from one parent to the other, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You let me plan. You let me believe I was coming. And now you're telling me there was never room for me?" The sound of dragging wheels on tile made me turn. Ethan emerged from the house, pulling his designer luggage behind him. He stopped dead when he saw me. "Hey, Rach," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "What's up?" "Apparently I'm not going to Hawaii," I shot back. my voice bitter. His eyes flicked to our parents, then back to me. That's, rough. He gave me a weak smile, the kind you give a stranger who's just spilled coffee on themselves. And then he kept walking. Chloe appeared next, her fingers intertwined with a tall man I assumed was Ryan. She froze when her eyes landed on me. Rachel, she breathed, her face pale. I thought Mom was going to call you. Well, she didn't, I replied sharply. Instead, I drove here ready for the airport, only to be told I was never part of the plan. Chloe's lips parted like she wanted to apologize, but no words came. Her grip tightened on Ryan's hand, and she lowered her eyes. So there we were, me on the porch, suitcase by my side, heart cracking open in real time. And them, framed in the doorway, a complete family unit preparing for a trip I had built my hopes around. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower down the street. I could have screamed. I could have begged. I could have demanded they see me. But years of being the overlooked middle child had trained me otherwise. I smiled instead, the kind of brittle smile that masks devastation. Have a great trip, I said, my voice level. I turned, dragging my suitcase behind me like dead weight. Rachel! Wait, Chloe called after me, but I didn't look back. I drove home in a blur, my hands stiff on the wheel, my chest hollow. Hours later, as I sat slumped on my couch still in my sundress, I opened Instagram. And there it was, Chloe's selfie at the airport with Mom, Dad, Ethan, and Ryan, all grinning, captioned, Hawaii, bound with my favorite people. My phone buzzed with a new notification. A payment request from Dad, $50 your share of villa and flights. The audacity nearly knocked the wind out of me. Not only had they cut me out of the trip, but they expected me to pay for it too. My fingers trembled as I stared at the glowing screen. That was the moment something inside me shifted. My heartbreak hardened into anger, sharp and alive. Because being left behind was one thing, being asked to fund my own exclusion was another. And that fury would drive me to make a choice that even I didn't see coming. It was the choice that would turn this betrayal into something far more dramatic. It was the moment I decided that if my family didn't want me on their vacation, I would rewrite the story myself. When my phone buzzed with that payment request, something in me snapped. $50. That was all it said. My father's name above it. The words, your share of villa and flights, typed out as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my chest heaving, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had already been erased from the trip, erased from their plans, erased from the family photo Chloe had posted with her cheerful caption. And now, on top of that, they wanted me to help foot the bill for my own exclusion. For a moment, I thought about calling them back and unleashing everything I had swallowed down for years. I pictured myself screaming into the phone, listing every moment they had overlooked me, every time they had pushed me to the margins while celebrating Ethan or coddling Chloe. But then I stopped. I knew if I went down that road, it would only end with more silence, more excuses, more gaslighting about how I was too sensitive or overreacting. So instead, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a dark, bitter one that shook me to my core. Then with my hands still trembling, I opened the same payment app, typed in $1, and sent it back with a message, you'll have a surprise. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shift the power back into my hands. Enough to let them know they hadn't broken me. I sat there in my sundress, hair still pinned back the way I had styled it for the airport, and I realized I was done waiting for my family to see me. If they wouldn't make space for me at their table, then I would create my own. The idea formed like a spark in the dark. Why should I waste the vacation time I had carefully carved out? Why should I spend the next 2 weeks sulking in my apartment while they posted smiling pictures from Maui? No. If they wanted to exclude me, I would show them what exclusion really looked like. I would take myself to Hawaii anyway. I would prove that I didn't need their invitation to write my own story. I opened my laptop and pulled up flight searches. My breath caught when I saw the prices. Last-minute fares from Chicago to Maui were astronomical, far more than I had budgeted. My stomach knotted as I stared at the numbers, calculating how much it would set me back. I had been saving for a down payment on a condo, scraping together every extra dollar. Booking this trip would put that dream on hold. But then I remembered the look on my mother's face at the door, the way her smile didn't falter as she told me I wasn't welcome. I remembered my father's silence, his refusal to defend me. I remembered Ethan's awkward shrug, Chloe's downcast eyes, the audacity of that payment request. And I realized something important. My self-respect was worth more than a condo. My dignity was worth more than whatever money I'd saved. With a kind of reckless clarity, I clicked purchase. A flight leaving the next evening. A villa not far from theirs in Wailea, smaller but beautiful, with an ocean view and a private balcony. The confirmation email hit my inbox seconds later, and with it came a rush of adrenaline unlike anything I had felt in years. I wasn't just going to sit at home and lick my wounds. I was going to Hawaii. On my own. And I was going to make sure they saw me not as the forgotten middle child, but as someone they should have never underestimated. That night, I called Samantha. She was the only person I trusted to hear the whole story. When she picked up, I could barely keep my voice steady. "They left me behind," I said, "and then they asked me to pay for it." There was a beat of silence, and then she practically shouted, "Are you kidding me? That's cruel, Rachel. That's beyond cruel." "I know," I whispered. "But I'm not going to let them win this time. I bought a ticket. I'm going to Maui tomorrow." The line went quiet, and then she laughed, not out of mockery but out of shock and admiration. "That's insane. That's brilliant. Are you really doing this?" "I have to," I said. "For once in my life, I have to stand up for myself. They need to see that they can't treat me this way anymore." She exhaled loudly, like she was letting go of her own anger. "Then do it. Make them regret ever leaving you behind, and when you get there, make sure you look like you belong more than they ever did." Her words lit something inside me. Before bed, I repacked my suitcase. This time, it wasn't filled with gifts for them. It was filled for me clothes that made me feel powerful. Swimsuits I loved, a brand new sun hat Samantha insisted I buy. I stood in front of the mirror adjusting it on my head, and for the first time all day, I smiled. The hurt was still there, raw and heavy, but beneath it was a new current of resolve. Tomorrow, I would step onto a plane not as their afterthought, but as a woman who had chosen herself. Tomorrow, I would fly across the ocean, not to beg for inclusion, but to prove I never needed their permission to shine. And as I zipped up my suitcase and set my alarm for the morning, I couldn't help but wonder how they would react when they discovered that the daughter they thought they had left behind was, in fact, closer than they ever imagined. Because while they were sipping cocktails on the beach, they had no idea that I was on my way to rewrite the ending of this story. I barely slept the night before my flight. My mind ran in circles, swinging between fury, disbelief, and a strange thrill I couldn't quite name. By the time I rolled my suitcase through O'Hare the next afternoon, I felt raw, hollowed out by betrayal but strangely alive. I had no idea what awaited me on the other side of that flight, only that I needed to get on it. The first leg to Los Angeles was uneventful, though my nerves kept me from relaxing. I sat by the window, staring at the wing of the plane cutting through the sky, wondering if I had lost my mind. Was I really about to spend thousands of dollars just to prove to myself that I mattered? Maybe. But sitting back in Chicago, licking my wounds, would have been worse. It was on the second flight, the long stretch from LAX to Maui, that the universe threw me something I didn't expect. My seatmate was an older woman with kind eyes and a floral scarf tied loosely around her neck. She struggled with her carry-on, and I helped her lift it into the overhead bin. She thanked me warmly and introduced herself as Margaret. Almost immediately, her presence calmed me. There was something steady about her, the way she folded her hands in her lap, the way she asked questions and actually waited for the answers. As the plane took off, she asked if I was headed to Maui for vacation. I hesitated. I could have lied, Could have said yes and left it at that. But something about her made me want to tell the truth. So I did. Slowly at first, then all at once. I told her about the planning, the gifts, the moment on the porch when my mother told me I was never on the guest list. I told her about the payment request, the humiliation of scrolling through Instagram and seeing Chloe's smiling face at the airport, captioned Hawaii bound with my favorite people. By the time I finished, my throat was tight and my eyes were burning. I thought she might look at me with pity or, worse, judgment. Instead, she reached across the armrest and patted my hand gently. "My dear," she said softly. "Good for you. You're doing exactly what you should. Sometimes family needs a wake-up call. Too often we accept treatment from relatives that we'd never tolerate from anyone else. Flying out here, standing up for yourself, that's brave. Don't ever let them convince you otherwise." Her words washed over me like balm. For the first time in days I felt understood. Not pitied, not dismissed, but seen. As the hours wore on, we shared stories. She told me about her son, David, who had moved to Maui years ago and built a life there. He owned a boutique resort in Kapalua Bay, a place she described with such pride I could almost see it through her words. White sand beaches, bungalows nestled against the shoreline, a place that blended luxury with intimacy. "You must come visit," she insisted, scribbling down the name and address on a slip of paper torn from her notebook. "David loves meeting people with spirit, and you, Rachel, you have spirit. I'll make sure he knows about you before you arrive." I smiled, but deep down, I felt something stirring. Could it be possible that out of this disaster, out of the wreckage of my family's rejection, something new and unexpected could bloom? Margaret kept me company for most of the flight, her steady voice and gentle humor easing the tension in my chest. She reminded me of what kindness felt like, and how it could come from the most unlikely places. When we landed in Maui, the humid air wrapped around me like a blanket. I breathed in the scent of plumeria, the sound of palm trees rustling in the breeze, and for the first time in days, my shoulders dropped. I rolled my suitcase through the terminal, Margaret beside me, and when her son appeared at arrivals, I felt a sudden jolt of disbelief. David was tall, tanned from the island sun, and carried himself with the ease of someone who belonged exactly where he was. When Margaret introduced us, he shook my hand firmly, his eyes narrowing just slightly, as though measuring the weight of my story before I even told it. "She's the one I told you about," Margaret said, her voice brimming with affection. "The girl with spirit." David smiled. "Then she deserves the best we can offer." At first, I thought he was being polite. But before I knew it, he was insisting I stay at their resort, in one of their finest bungalows, completely complimentary. I tried to protest, to tell him I had already booked a villa, but he waved it off. "At Kapalua Bay, we live by aloha," he said. "And aloha means no one gets left behind." The irony of his words hit me like a tidal wave. My own family had left me behind, deliberately, cruelly. Yet here were strangers, people I had known for less than a day, offering me a place not just to stay but to belong. As we drove along the coast toward Kapalua, the sun beginning to dip low, painting the ocean in streaks of pink and gold, I looked out at the waves crashing against the shore and felt something shift deep inside me. Maybe this trip wasn't going to be about chasing my family's approval after all. Maybe it was about something bigger. Still, as beautiful as the island was, as generous as Margaret and David were, I couldn't forget why I was there. My family was still just down the beach, laughing, drinking, pretending I didn't exist. And sooner or later, they would find out I was closer than they imagined. The thought made my pulse quicken. Because when that moment came when I stood before them on this island, they would finally see me, whether they wanted to or not. Wailea Beach was already alive with color and sound by the time I arrived that morning. The ocean shimmered like liquid glass, children's laughter carried across the sand, and the smell of sunscreen and salt air mingled in the breeze. I stood for a moment just beyond the palms, my sandals sinking slightly into the warm ground, scanning the stretch of beach. And then, I saw them. They were impossible to miss. My father sat in a lounge chair under a wide umbrella, a paperback balanced on his lap. My mother, in a wide-brimmed hat, was smoothing lotion across her arms. Ethan was tossing a frisbee back and forth with Ryan, and Chloe knelt near a cooler, setting out snacks with the easy grace of someone who belonged. They looked like the perfect family unit, complete, content. And for the briefest flicker of a moment, I almost turned around. What was I doing here? What did I hope to gain by walking into the middle of their vacation? But then I remembered standing on that porch, suitcase in hand, hearing the words, "You were never actually on the guest list." I remembered the audacity of that payment request, the cruelty of seeing their smiling faces on social media as though I didn't exist. My chest tightened. No, I told myself. I had every right to be here. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and started walking across the sand. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the surf. The distance between us seemed endless, and yet too short, because in seconds Chloe looked up. Her hand froze halfway to the cooler, her eyes widening as if she had seen a ghost. "Rachel," she whispered, but the wind carried her voice away. The frisbee slipped from Ethan's hands. My mother turned, followed Chloe's gaze, and dropped the sunscreen bottle with a thud. My father lowered his book, blinking into the sunlight. By the time I reached them, every pair of eyes was locked on me. "Hi, family," I said evenly, though my throat was tight. "Surprise." My dad was the first to speak, his voice uncertain. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" "I decided to join the family vacation after all," I replied, setting my beach bag down beside me. Of course, I had to book my own accommodations, since I was told the villa didn't have room for me. My mother stood, brushing sand from her cover-up as if preparing for battle. "Rachel, this is inappropriate. You can't just appear like this." "Inappropriate?" My voice rose despite myself. "You mean like telling your daughter she's never been on the guest list? Like letting her take time off work, pack her bags, buy gifts, only to slam the door in her face?" People nearby began to glance over. A couple paused mid-walk, their dog straining on the leash as they looked at us. I saw it, felt it, the heat of strangers' curiosity pressing in. "Keep your voice down," Mom hissed, her cheeks flushing red. "I'm not raising my voice," I said, forcing calm into every syllable. "But I am going to say what I need to say." I looked at each of them in turn. For years, I've been the afterthought, the forgotten middle child. I've smiled and nodded, while you celebrated Ethan's achievements, while you indulged Chloe's whims, while you left me to fend for myself. I told myself it didn't matter. That family is family, even if I was always last in line. But this? My chest heaved as the words tumbled out. This was deliberate. This was cruel. Ethan shifted awkwardly, his frisbee dangling at his side. "Come on, Rach," he muttered. "You're making a scene." I turned to him sharply. "I'm not making a scene, Ethan. I'm standing up for myself. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask why." Chloe's eyes glistened, her lips trembling. I thought Mom told you weeks ago. I'm so sorry." "You thought wrong," I said. "And not one of you bothered to check with me directly. Not one of you thought I might matter enough to include." Ryan, clearly uncomfortable, mumbled something about getting in the water and walked off toward the surf. Mom's face hardened again. "You're always so independent, Rachel. We thought you'd enjoy the time alone. You never seemed to need us." I felt a bitter laugh claw up my throat. "That's the excuse you've always used, isn't it? Rachel's independent. Rachel doesn't need us." Did it ever occur to you that I became independent because I had no choice? Because I learned early that I couldn't count on you to make space for me? A hush settled over the little circle of sand. I could feel the weight of strangers watching. A woman on a towel a few feet away actually nodded faintly, her face sympathetic. For once, I wasn't invisible. I reached into my beach bag and pulled out the small wrapped gifts I had carried all this way. My mother frowned in confusion as I handed her a pair of pearl earrings, my father a carved wooden turtle, Ethan a Hawaiian print wallet, Chloe a delicate shell necklace. "I brought these because, despite everything, You're still my family, I said, my voice steady. When I thought this was going to be our trip, I planned to give them to you. Because that's what family does. They think of each other. For a moment, no one moved. My father turned the turtle over in his hands, his face unreadable. My mother's fingers shook as she held the earrings. Chloe looked down at the necklace, tears spilling silently onto the sand. It was then that I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned, and there was Margaret, her scarf fluttering in the wind, with David walking beside her. "There you are," she said warmly. "We were just talking about tonight's sunset cruise." My family's heads snapped toward them, confusion flashing across their faces. David extended his hand to my father. "I'm David. Your daughter made quite an impression on my mother during her flight. She's our VIP guest at Kapalua Bay Resort." His words rang clear, deliberate. "We're honored to host her." The silence that followed was heavy. My family looked from David to me, realization dawning, discomfort flickering across their features. In that instant, the balance shifted. For once, I wasn't the forgotten one. For once, I had the upper hand. But even as the power surged in my chest, I knew this wasn't over. Their silence was only the beginning. The real reckoning, the words that still needed to be said, was coming next, and I was ready for it. After the confrontation on the beach, the air between us felt different. Something had cracked open, and though my family tried to patch it with silence and awkward glances, I could feel the fracture running straight through the center of us. The shock on their faces as David introduced me as his resort's VIP guest lingered in my mind. For the first time, I had shifted the balance. They weren't the ones deciding who belonged and who didn't. I was no longer the invisible daughter. Later that afternoon, as the crowd on the beach began to thin, my mother approached me. She looked smaller somehow, her hat tilted low against the sun, as though it might shield her from what had already been said. "Rachel," she began, her voice low, "we should have handled this differently." I crossed my arms, the surf brushing my ankles. "You think?" She winced, but kept going. "Maybe you could come to the villa. We'll figure out the sleeping arrangements. You can take the pull-out couch, or—" I cut her off with a short, bitter laugh. "The pull-out couch. After everything, that's your solution?" Her face tightened, but I could see the cracks in her composure. "I'm trying to make peace," she whispered. "Peace isn't made with scraps," I replied. "I'm happy at Kapalua Bay. I need space, Mom. You chose to exclude me, and that's not something I can just sweep under the rug." She didn't argue, and that in itself was telling. For once, my mother had no tidy justification, no clever twist of words to make me feel unreasonable. She simply nodded, shame shadowing her eyes, and walked back to the villa. The next morning, I was sitting on the balcony of my bungalow, sipping coffee as the ocean glittered below, when I heard a soft knock on the door. It was Chloe. She looked uneasy, her hair pulled back in a messy braid, her shoulders tense. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated before opening the door wider. She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping across the luxury of the bungalow. "Wow," she murmured. "This place is incredible. Way nicer than ours." I didn't answer. I waited. And finally she turned to me, her face pale. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something Mom and Dad didn't want you to know." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" She chewed her lip before speaking. "They're having money problems. Dad's retirement account took a huge hit last year. They had already put down the deposit for the villa before they realized they couldn't really afford it. They thought they had no choice but to go through with it. And then, when I mentioned bringing Ryan, it pushed everything over the edge. They decided someone had to be cut, and they thought—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "They thought it should be me." I finished for her, my voice hollow. She nodded miserably. "Because you're always the strong one, the independent one. They thought you'd understand best. They thought you wouldn't mind." I stared at her, anger and sorrow tangling inside me. They could have told me the truth. Instead, they let me plan with them, let me buy gifts, let me take time off work. They lied to me, Chloe. That's worse than leaving me out. "I know," she said quickly. "It was wrong, So wrong. I should have said something. I should have told you sooner. Her remorse looked real, but it didn't undo the wound. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the weight of her words pressing into me. My parents' pride had cost me more than money. It had cost me trust. Chloe sat beside me, her voice soft. I'm sorry, Rachel. I really am. If I could go back, I wouldn't have brought Ryan. I didn't realize what it would mean. I didn't realize what they were hiding. I turned to her, studying her face. She was younger, still learning, still trying to find her place in the same family that had shaped me. It's not just about Ryan, I said. It's about years of being told I was fine with less. About always being the one expected to understand, to forgive, to stay quiet. Tears slid down her cheeks, and she reached for my hand. Can we start over? Just you and me? I want us to be real sisters, not just people who share parents. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Then, slowly, I squeezed her hand back. We'll see. But it has to be different this time. When she left, I stood at the balcony again, staring at the horizon. The truth Chloe had revealed didn't excuse what had been done to me, but it added another layer to the story. My parents weren't just careless, they were hiding behind pride, burying their struggles instead of asking for help, and they had chosen to sacrifice me in the process. That knowledge didn't ease the sting. If anything, it sharpened it, because it proved that even when pushed to the wall, they still didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. And so, as the waves rolled against the shore below, I knew that the next time I faced them, I couldn't just demand an apology. I would have to demand something far harder. A change. The cracks in our family armor were finally visible. What came next would determine if those cracks could be healed, or if they would split us apart for good. Dinner at Kapalua Bay was unlike anything my family had ever experienced, and I knew that was part of why I'd chosen it. The restaurant overlooked the ocean, its open-air terrace bathed in the glow of torches, the sound of waves breaking just beyond the rocks. As the servers moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of fresh seafood and tropical cocktails, I sat straighter in my chair, determined to keep control of the moment. My family arrived looking subdued, almost out of place among the polished guests. For once, they weren't the center of attention. I was. We ordered quietly at first, the tension so thick it felt like I could slice it with my fork. No one dared mention the beach confrontation, though I could see the memory flickering in their eyes every time they looked at me. My father kept fidgeting with his napkin, smoothing the edges until they were crisp, while my mother's smile was tight, her pearl earrings catching the candlelight like sharp little daggers. Finally, after the main course had been cleared, my dad cleared his throat. It was the same sound he always made when he wanted control of the room, but this time it faltered. "Rachel," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I canceled that payment request. It was wrong of me. And we'd like to reimburse you for your expenses. Your flight, your villa, everything." For a moment, I just looked at him. A part of me had craved those words, had fantasized about hearing them, but when they finally came, they didn't land the way I thought they would. They felt hollow, like a bandage slapped over a wound that needed stitches. "I don't need reimbursement," I said slowly, deliberately, making sure my words cut through the silence. "What I need is respect. What I need is to know this won't happen again, that I won't be erased from my own family ever again. Ever." My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "Of course we don't want to hurt you," she said, her voice soft, rehearsed. "You know how much we love you." "Do I?" I asked, my eyes locking on hers. Because from where I'm sitting, love hasn't looked like inclusion, it hasn't looked like care, it's looked like assumption. You assumed I'd be fine. You assumed I didn't need what the others did. And I'm done being the one who always understands, who always swallows her hurt so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. The table fell silent again, but this time it was heavier. My father's jaw clenched, and Ethan finally broke it with a cough, like he couldn't take the weight pressing down on all of us. "Look," he said awkwardly, "I know things have been unfair. I know you felt left out. And honestly, you're right. We should have spoken up, me, especially. His words surprised me. I turned toward him, eyebrows raised. You? You've benefited from this more than anyone. I know, he admitted, his eyes dropping to the tablecloth. I went along with it because it was easier, because I didn't want to rock the boat. But seeing you stand up for yourself on that beach, it made me realize I've been complicit. I let Mom and Dad treat you differently, and I never said a word. I'm sorry for that. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Ethan had never apologized to me for anything. The fact that he was sitting there, looking ashamed, shook me in a way I didn't expect. Then do better, I said finally. If you mean what you're saying, prove it. Don't just tell me you're sorry. Show me you want to be my brother, not just the golden child. He nodded, his expression earnest. I want that. I really do. The conversation shifted slightly after that. Chloe spoke up too, her voice soft but steady. She admitted she should have told me the truth about Ryan, that she should have checked on me when things didn't feel right. Her apology was different from Ethan's, more emotional, less structured, but it mattered just the same. As the night went on, I realized something important. I wasn't just demanding respect anymore. I was setting boundaries. I was making it clear that my role in this family was going to change, whether they were ready for it or not. I wouldn't accept the scraps of attention I'd been fed for years. I wouldn't quietly pay for vacations I wasn't invited to. I wouldn't sit in the back seat, literally, or figuratively, while everyone else stretched out in comfort. When dessert arrived, an elaborate platter of tropical fruits and a delicate coconut panna cotta, I leaned back in my chair, studying the faces of my family. They looked tired, almost chastened, like children caught in a lie. For once, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the one holding the truth, the one who finally had the courage to demand what she deserved. But the real test wasn't in this dinner, with its torches and ocean views and carefully prepared speeches. The real test would come later, in the quiet moments, when old habits threatened to creep back in. Would they actually change? Or would this be another moment smoothed over, forgotten in the rush of daily life? As I left the restaurant that night, the waves crashing in the dark, just beyond the terrace, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had finally said the words that needed to be spoken, heavier because I knew this was only the beginning. And as I walked back toward my bungalow, the torchlight flickering on the path, I thought about the next morning, when I would face my father alone. What he had to say, and what I would say back, would decide if this fragile beginning could truly grow into something new. When I boarded that plane back to Chicago, I knew I wasn't the same woman who had left. The Rachel who pulled into her parents' driveway with her suitcase packed and her heart wide open had been crushed on that porch, but she didn't disappear. She transformed. What started as heartbreak had become defiance, and what began as defiance had become clarity. The truth is, my family may never fully understand the depth of the pain they caused me. And maybe that's okay. Because this experience taught me something I had needed to learn for a long time. I don't need their validation to know my worth. For years, I had been waiting for them to notice me, to appreciate me, to finally treat me as an equal. I thought love meant patience, endurance, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. But love without respect is hollow. In Hawaii, standing up to them wasn't about punishing them, it was about reclaiming myself. It was about saying out loud what I had carried silently since childhood. That I deserved better than being an afterthought. That I deserved to be seen, valued, and included. And the biggest realization of all? I didn't need them to grant me that dignity. I could give it to myself. Since that trip, things have shifted. My parents reach out more often. My siblings try harder to include me. But even if they slip back into old habits, I won't. I've drawn a boundary that will not move again. Because boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, they're doors we decide how and when to open. They're reminders that self-respect must come first, even with family. If you take anything from my story, I hope it's this. You don't have to accept being treated as less just because it's family. You are allowed to demand respect. You are allowed to set boundaries. And you are allowed to choose peace, even if it means walking away for a while. Sometimes the greatest act of love is showing people how to treat you by refusing to accept anything less. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If this story resonated, please like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who might need to hear they are worthy too. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to draw a hard boundary with your family? How did it change you?